Hello, everyone. How are you? Hope you're doing well. Welcome to this live webinar on behalf of the TEFL org. My name is Carl. I'm a teacher trainer. I'm an online EFL teacher. I'm an English examiner. I generally work from my spare room / office in my house here in Northern Ireland, but I also do some face-to-face work in various parts, including if you come to Northern Ireland and you do one of our teacher training courses, you might get to spend the weekend with me talking about all things EFL. Before COVID, I used to do lots of work in Spain, which matches today's topic, which is teaching Spanish speaking students English. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the common problems they have and some solutions to them. But please, if you've got any experience at all of teaching Spanish students or Spanish speaking students, doesn't have to be students from Spain, because of course we have Central American students, we have South American students, we have students all around the world that might have Spanish as their first language, because it's a big, widely spoken language. If you've got any experience of anything like that, please do put it in the chat. Also, please say hello. I can see some people saying hello. Piedad, hi from Colombia. We're going to need your tell us if I'm right or I'm wrong. Let me know, Piedad. Raminda is from London. Hi, Raminda. Rick's in from Arizona. Charles from Chicago. Julie's from Chester. Hi, Julie. Lots more hellos coming in there. Please do let us know where you are in the world. Okay. Also, as I said, this is live, so it appears on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. If you have a question, please do put it in the chat and I will get around to answering the question. It doesn't have to be about our topic. It can be about anything to do with EFL. Right, let me get up a PowerPoint here. Okay, there we go. Right, so first of all, a couple of stats that came up as I was researching this one. Now, this is just for people in Spain. This is a statistic I could find, and it's about 60% of Spaniards say in a poll that they don't speak English at all. So they feel that they don't speak any English, which for a European country, I found a little bit surprising, to be honest with you, to say that no English at all. Now, some of them probably do speak some English. They just think that they don't speak any English. But I think what that shows is actually, to me, it shows that maybe English teaching in primary schools and high schools in the Spanish sort of state or private sector probably don't teach English very effectively. Because if you look at other countries within Europe, such as Germany, who speak really good English, such as the Scandinavian countries, but also sort of, countries in France and Italy, I would say probably that number is a little bit lower in those countries as well. So that kind of shows that Spanish people maybe don't feel very confident about speaking Spanish. 7% of the population of Central and South America are learning English. So that's, there's a lot of people in these countries. So that is a big number of people that are actively say they are learning English. So there's quite a big market going on in Central and South America for people wanting to learn English. Now, not all of these will be Spanish speaking, because that does actually include Brazil as well, which is a Portuguese speaking country, but the majority would be Spanish speaking there. And the amount spent on English learning is set to triple by 2030. So this is a statistic that I found to do with like the business side of things. And you can see that there's a growing number of people who speak Spanish. Now, this is just Spanish speaking students who want to invest in language learning. So it's a growing market, and it's something that you might want to get a piece of. Now, this is all according to a Google's AI overview, so just be a bit wary of some of the statistics. I did dig into a bit, and they looked okay, but as you know, with the internet, you got to be a bit careful. Not this webinar, of course not. Right, let's talk a little bit about some. Sorry, if you agreed with that, if you disagree with that, please do put it in the chat. Right, so let's talk about some pronunciation mistakes. Now, the sort of thing that I'm going to be talking about, like the typical mistakes that Spanish speakers make. Now, Spain has Spanish speakers are huge. The numbers are huge. And maybe Slightly, the mistakes that people in Spain would make might be different from the people that in Mexico make, but generally these are sort of seen as the mistakes that Spanish speakers make. This is also very useful if you're going to have an interview with a school that has predominantly Spanish speaking students. So if you're going to go work abroad in Mexico, in Argentina, in Spain, you know, if you can sort of mention some of these, it'll show that you've done some of your research. Right. So one of the common pronunciation mistakes that Spanish speakers make is dropping something called consonant clusters at the end of words. So what is a consonant cluster? It's basically when two, not letters, but two sounds of English that are in the consonant category, such here as the S and the T. When they come together, when you got two together, that is called a consonant cluster. Now, some of them are like a double, some of them are a triple, and some of them are, let's see, there's a quadruple or more. Okay, so basically, Spanish speakers would generally not pronounce that st at the end. So they might say one, because in Spanish, generally, you don't get these consonant clusters at the end. With next, they might not say all of it. They might forget the t at the end. Next. They might not go next. Glimpsed. They might also not say the st at the end, because they have to learn that in English this is something we have, and it's not something you have in Spanish. It's something you not got to work at. Now, why is this important? Because if you look, for example, here, it would take the tense of the verb. So if they don't say the ud, then they wouldn't know what the speaker, the listener might not know if it's past or present tense they're talking about. So also consonant clusters at the start. They sometimes don't say them correctly. They also sometimes might put an extra sound in before that. Extending vowel sounds. So in English, we have short and long vowel sounds. And sometimes they would take a short vowel sound and extend it to a long one. And that might change the meaning of the word. Ship and sheep. So instead of saying ship, they might say sheep. So things like that have got to be listened to, something you've got to check on. You might do some lessons about that. V and B sound the same to them quite often. The way we pronounce V, you know, with the teeth on our lips is quite different from how you pronounce B, where your teeth aren't used. Spanish people have problems replicating that sound because it doesn't come so naturally to them. So this is something that you might need to teach. This is something you've got to listen out for, something you need to error correct. H sounds. So they might not say, in Spanish, quite often they drop the H's. The most obvious one to think about is hola, which is hello. They don't say, it's spelt in Spanish H-O-L-A. They don't say the H, they just say hola. And they then replicate that in English, and they might not say the H sounds, especially at the start of words. So something you would have to teach in. Also, now Spanish and English are from a similar, not exactly the same, but from a similar sort of region, but the stress has changed. The stress is different, not wildly different as sort of English is to Chinese or to Korean, for example, but they don't tend to, in Spanish, stress the words in a sentence like we do in English. There's a lot more emphasis on syllable stress instead of sentence stress. And if you don't stress the words naturally, that can affect you to get to the higher levels of pronunciation in a language. So it can definitely affect them if they were going for a very high IELTS, Trinity, Cambridge score, for example. So you might do some work on that. Julie, yeah, good point. So Julie has written there in the chat, my student says I am leaving, and it's not sure if they are living or leaving. Well, I'm living, yeah. So again, perfect. If you've got any more examples like that, please do put it in. Julie, what do you do to try and fix that? I'm going to get to some of the solutions on another slide, okay? Right, vocabulary. So parts of the words in both languages look similar. Okay, so for example, the English word success is éxito, pardon my pronunciation, in Spanish, which obviously sounds a bit like exit, but actually exit is salida. So a Spanish student might, instead of saying the word exit, they might say éxito because they think it's sort of similar. It's called a false friend. And there are many examples of this. If you put into Google Spanish false friends English, you'll find loads and loads that come up. And they might say these, and at the start they're very shocked, and they're so clear that that's what they think it is, but actually it's not. You need to do lots of vocabulary lessons around that. There's preposition issues are quite different. So, of, on, in Spanish, they sort of either don't use them or they use them differently from how we do in English. And you need to make sure that they're getting those correct in order to get good accuracy, again, to get high level grades in some sort of English exam. And also sometimes literal translation doesn't often work. So these are 4 examples here. Now my Spanish isn't great. I'm just going to remember this one, historia, for example. So in Spanish, that I think is the word for story, and it's also the word for history. Now, obviously, a story and history is sort of similar. And there are examples in English as well where we have multiple definitions for a word, for example. So it's not just a Spanish thing, it's an English thing, and this can also cause difficulty. But if a student puts into an online dictionary historia and they see history comes up, they might just keep using the word history for story, for example. So they've got to be a bit careful with the translation and making sure that it's actually correct. And the way they write down vocabulary, that kind of thing helps. There's 3 other examples there if you want to have a look at those as well. Right, grammar differences. So pronouns is quite a big one. So they don't tend to in Spanish use like male and female pronouns in terms of sort of object pronouns or subject pronouns, possessive pronouns like we do in English. They just quite often use the word su instead of using him, instead of her, instead of his, instead of hers, for example. So that could mean when they're speaking in English, they get these pronouns incorrect quite often. They don't sort of use the right one. They might say him instead of her, or they might say his instead of him. And again, this affects our accuracy. So you do lessons on pronouns, making sure that they're doing it correct. Word order. So Spanish adjectives tend to come after the nouns. In English, we tend to put the adjectives generally before the nouns. And this can cause issues, especially for lower levels, because they're so used to the Spanish way of doing things. And when they're learning adjectives, they don't put them in the correct way. So you got to do little exercises with word order where you cut up sentences. They put them in the right order. They number the words in the correct order, things like that. Not stating the subject of the sentence. So in sentences, for example, I drink water, the subject is I. In English. Now, quite often in Spanish, they wouldn't say yo, which is I. They would just say bebo agua, which means drink water. And you can get who's saying it by the word or the last letters of the verb. So they just drop subjects, and this can cause an issue, especially again with lower levels when they're just sort of learning English. They just think, okay, I don't need to use the subject of the sentence. I'll just start with a verb. Let's go from there. Or if they're being very, very fluent or they're very, very nervous at higher levels, they forget to do it as well. So again, doing some activities where you're doing word order, you're making sure that you're showing them that there's missing words, what they have to put in there, that kind of thing works. Adding extra negatives in Spanish can be quite normal. So an example of an extra negative, which you wouldn't do in English. So he did not do nothing. So we've got a negative there. We've got a negative there. I remember my grandma, when I was younger, would always say to me, Carl, don't say double negatives. And that's something that has stuck with me. And in Spanish, they might produce something sentence like this, because so in English, a Spanish speaker might produce something like this, and then they sort of forget that they're doing the extra negative there. So again, working on negatives, you would teach a lesson in negatives and you would go from there. Right, school cultures. Just want to talk a little bit about this in Spanish-speaking countries. And this isn't necessarily a Spanish-speaking thing, but it does come into when they learn English. So, you'll see similar ideas here to Chinese schools, to the way English schools learn languages as well. Okay, but school cultures, many English learners in these countries do not practice speaking and listening. So it can be quite common for them to feel they're quite fluent in speaking and feel they think they're quite good at listening when actually they're not that great in listening, I find, with Spanish students. And because they've not had English speaking practice, they sort of just take that Spanish speaking confidence that they have, and then they think they're doing really well, but actually they're making lots of errors. They haven't been error corrected properly and that kind of thing. Because many schools only assess by writing and reading. Now, the reason why many schools do that is because it's quite easy to assess writing and reading. You just tick a yes, you put a tick, we put a cross in for a reading example. You also can just mark, by grammar mistakes, that kind of thing. It's seen as quite an easy thing to do, whereas assessing someone's speaking can be a bit tricky. And listening is sort of just not really seen as important as writing and reading. So and a lot of that comes from teaching grammar as well, very grammar focused classes, and you can often see that most clearly in writing. So if you get a job like this, you might have a lot of focus on speaking and listening to make sure that they are bringing up that level. Also, many school teachers do not error correct effectively. So what does that mean? That means that basically they sort of very clear when someone makes an error, they're very sort of matter of fact with it. They're sort of saying, no, that's wrong. Whereas, a correct sort of error correcting, and I've done webinars where I just talk about this, would be to do it in a positive way, to do it in a way where students self-corrects themselves. And because of that, students aren't sort of correcting the errors appropriately. They're not learning from their mistakes, and they keep those mistakes going. So just a little bit of things to think about, and things that you might do differently if you are hired to go work in a language school or a university or something. Right. So how to fix mistakes. Please, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me, if you've got any other points, anything I've missed, please do put that in the chat. Also, if you've got any questions at all about teaching English as a foreign language, please write them in there and I will get around to it. It doesn't have to be about Spanish speakers. It could be about going abroad, doing the certificates, anything at all. Right, how to fix the mistakes. So if it's pronunciation, minimal pairs practice is quite important here. So that works with vowel sounds such as the ship and the sheep, which is one of the most famous ones you can do. And there's a textbook called Ship and Sheep, which I think is a very good pronunciation textbook, worth getting. Something I should also say is I've done webinars where I just talk about teaching pronunciation, might be worth checking. Basically, with minimal pairs practice, you want to make sure the student's aware of the differences. And that starts with listening for the differences. So you do lots of activities about listening, and then you do some activities about producing them and error correcting them, making sure they're okay. If you want to know more, type minimal pairs practice into your Google, you'll find lots of stuff. Getting students to notice their mistakes with the consonant clusters is important, and the word stress. Again, listening, getting them to do some dictations. Sometimes, if they're really bad, you can get them to speak into a microphone or into their phone. They then pass it to a friend, and the friend writes down what they think they've said. See if that sort of dictation thing can work. And then they go, oh, wow, my friend couldn't understand, so I must be making some mistakes. Very, very specific vocabulary lessons around some of those false friends can be really, really useful. Making sure that they know that English is very different in terms of what they're saying. making them aware that they're saying this a lot, that they've got this mistake, and also just sort of recording the vocabulary correctly really helps. So when they come across a new word in English, such as exit, they don't just write exito next to it. They've got to, write down that, it's a leader. If it's something like when there's lots of different definitions, then they've got to make sure that they've written each type of definition on their vocabulary notebook, whether that's an online notebook or a carry around with your notebook. Making sure that they understand that there's lots of definitions in English can really help. So grammar, a lot of it comes from effective teaching. So it's not just a lecture where you're standing at the board. This is the grammar point that we're doing today. You're looking for teaching where they are practicing it themselves, doing control practice, doing freer practice. And then you are also going in there and doing good error correction, where you're not just telling them that they're wrong, you're giving them a chance to fix the error themselves. Okay, so this kind of thing is quite important. Speaking of listening, again, it's effective lessons. Don't just think you're going to put a bit of speaking in with a grammar. Why not do a whole speaking lesson with lots of emphasis on accuracy, emphasis on fluency, whatever it might be. Doing that can really help the students, as you're doing a skills lesson, not a grammar lesson. That can really help to boost their confidence. And also with listening as well, doing a specific listening lesson, that can work really well. You don't have to always do a grammar lesson. You don't always have to do a vocabulary lesson. You could do a lesson around functions of speaking. You could do a lesson around sub skills of listening. This kind of thing can really help. Thank you, everyone. Right. Are there any questions? Let me just scroll up and see all the hellos. Piedad, yep, said hello. Raminda, Charles, hi. Nelida, we didn't say hello to you before. Hope you're doing well. You're in Argentina, living in California. Julie is in Detroit. Yes, of course. And Sunil is in Chennai. Right, got a question here. Let me just read this one out, because I'm not sure if I can get this one up on the screen. What are the best countries to teach Spanish speaking students? So this is quite an interesting one. Thanks, Tim. Sorry, I should have said Tim there. So basically, obviously Spain it comes across as the best country to go and teach Spanish in. There are generally quite a lot of jobs in Spain, in different parts of Spain as well. It's really quite different. The southern coast, Andalusia, is quite different from Barcelona up in the northeast. You've got big chunks of Spain where there's not many big towns. It's a big old country, so it kind of does depend. There's a good chance. From my experience of examining in Spain, there's almost every single town has some sort of language school. It's still quite a big part of going and working in Spain. And the jobs, generally, they can be enough for you to live on. You're not going to be able to save lots and lots of money just working for a school. If you want to make a bit more money, private students tend to be the way forward in Spain. But you can live pretty well. You can have lots of fun. Spain is a great country to live in. Obviously, the weather's great. There's also, as I said, very different. Valencia is one of my favorite cities, although unfortunately they had those floods very recently. But there's really, useful, really great places to go live in Spain. If you go live in Central or Spanish America or South America, again, widely different countries. So you got to go and look at them. Very different economies. Mexico is quite well established in Central America. You see jobs advertised to go and work out in Central America, in Mexico. Costa Rica is another one, but generally for the rest of Central America, there's not a huge amount of jobs advertised. You've got to try and do the legwork yourself, find the job and apply for yourself. And then I can see, David, you put a question in there. Any thoughts on knowledge of teaching in Colombia, Ecuador, or Peru? Okay, so I've done webinars where I just talk about teaching in Central and South America, so it might be worth watching that, David. Right. Ecuador, I'll start with the probably easier ones to talk about. Ecuador or Peru, there are people learning Spanish there. Peru, they're not the richest of countries there, so you're not going to get paid a huge amount of money, and because the jobs aren't overly well paid. Now, you've got enough money to live on, but you're not going to come back saving loads of money. Because they're not the richest of countries, they don't tend to advertise outside of Ecuador or Peru. So again, you'll have to sort of go on Google, do some searches for countries in, looking for language schools in Lima, Quito, and just making sure that there are actually language schools in there that you can go and work, and you can say that, look, I'm going to be here. They probably won't pay your flights. They probably won't pay you accommodation, but they will probably help you out when you're there. Okay. Now, Colombia is slightly different. Colombia is quite a rapidly growing economy, and they're becoming a bit more open to the world after the problems they've had in the past. So there are jobs generally advertised in these places. You do see them advertising for people abroad to come and work here. Now, they don't often pay for your flights or things like that, but they might pay for a bit of accommodation, that kind of thing. So probably the easiest one to get to of the three is Colombia. I know people that have worked in Colombia and absolutely loved it. It was always on my list before I settled down, and I never actually got round to working there. But I would say probably the three there, that Colombia is the easiest. Alan, who's monitoring the chat, I should have said, has just put a guide to teaching in Latin America in there. As I said, I've also done a YouTube video where I talk about working in South and Central America, so it might be worth checking that one out. Sunil, hi. Is it necessary to know a bit of Spanish? So, right, everywhere I've ever taught in the world, and that's big chance of Europe, that's big chance of Asia, the Middle East as well, and South Asia. I have arrived in those countries not speaking the language. Okay. So when I arrived in Japan, I did not know a word of Japanese. Same with Vietnam, same with Sri Lanka, for example. And that would be exactly the same when you go to a Spanish speaking country. The school wants you there to teach English. The bosses of the schools will speak English, hopefully to a good level, not always, but generally to a good level. They want you there to speak English, not to practice your Spanish. So you don't need to know any Spanish to go there. But to live there, to go out, to travel, it does help for sure to know a bit of Spanish. And you might be able to pick that up, Sunil, when you're there. Okay, you might take a bit of lessons. You might just be happy using your translator on your phone. Whatever it might be, you will need to know a bit of Spanish. That helps a lot. I think, I've traveled in South America, I've traveled in Central America, and it really does help to know a little bit of Spanish, to try a bit of Spanish. That's the most important thing as well. And, it could be you get a phrase book, but generally it does help for you to live. But to teach and to get the job, no. And that's same for Japanese if you're going to go to Japan, Mandarin if you're going to go to China. Okay. Rick, hi. Does the 120-hour course offer lessons on how to specifically teach to Spanish-speaking students? No, in the courses, we don't do specific nationalities. Okay. And the reason being is because the structure of lessons in terms of teaching skills, in terms of teaching grammar, doesn't change whether you're speaking Spanish, whether you're teaching Spanish students or you're teaching Japanese students or you're teaching Russian students. Okay. The principles are the same. The course sets you up to be dropped in any of those countries, and you can do a grammar lesson. Okay. Or a vocabulary lesson or a skills lesson, because it's not just all about grammar. And what you would really, that's what I always recommend to people, is you start to learn this information when you think about what country you want to go to. So I've done this webinar where I talk about how to teach Chinese students. If you're going to go teach Chinese students, you want to go live in China, think about the webinar I did there, maybe worth looking at. Get that sort of thing into your interview. Can really, really help you get it maybe into your application. I don't want to go into too much detail, but generally in the interview, you might bring it up. And the same if you're going to go teach in a Spanish-speaking country, you can then drop it in, about the pronunciation problems and how you would fix them. That kind of thing shows that you're really interested in going and teaching in that destination. Okay. Hope that answers, Rick. There's also loads of people that do YouTube. If I was going to go work in Mongolia, I would put in Mongolian students' English problems into Google, and I bet you there's somebody somewhere who's made a nice video about I think that's all the questions, unless there's any more. Sunil, that's very polite of you saying thank you to Alan. Thank you very much. I hope you did find that interesting. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've got any experience at all about teaching Spanish students and you're watching this when it's not live in a couple of months or whenever, please do put that in the chat because it's really good for people to know. Some things I want to tell you about that's going on at TEFL org at the moment. So basically, if you go to our website, tefl.org, you can find lots of things on there. But we have a podcast. The podcasts are fantastic. They're made by a gentleman called Ewan, interviewing loads of inspiring teachers around the world. I really think they're worth checking out at the moment, the podcast. There's new seasons. They're worth downloading. We have loads of guides to different parts of the world as well on our website. So if you just put in the top into the search, Spain or online teaching Spain, something like that, you'll find something that goes alongside with it. Really, really useful. And we've got loads of all our different courses on there as well that we offer. The basic one to do is a 120-hour one. But if you're going to go into teaching young learners, you're going to go teach exam English, you might want to upgrade and do some of the extra modules in that. There's plenty of ways to contact us. If you want more information, you can contact us through our Facebook page, through Instagram messages, I think. You can also go on our website. There's a chat with us function at the bottom. You can send us a message on there. Finally, we've got a Facebook discussion group that you can join, and that is monitored by lots of TEFL staff and other students, and you can ask questions on that. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do let us know if you've got any other ones you want us to talk about. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.